Blender, and software like it, is quite complex, with a steep learning curve. If I were to teach you every function, even I don't know them all, your brain would explode, and you wouldn't even remember half of them, especially if this is your first time working in 3D. Instead, I'm going to instill in you the fundamentals, as well as the bits of the software that will allow you to execute the 3D animation pipeline, from basic motion to rendering with lights, cameras, and sound. So with the fresh install of Blender on your computer, you should see the default view, which typically includes a collection containing a camera, a cube, and a light. If you don't see this for some reason, you can go to File, New, General to open up a new project. Keymap. If this is your first experience with this type of software, it may look like a lot, but you're simply seeing a ton of tools all at once, not all of which you will need to use at one time. Before we go through these different sections, we need to make a quick change to the keymap, which controls what hotkeys control various commands within the program. To access the keymap, go to Edit, Preferences. From the Preferences menu, go down to Keymap. Here you will find all the key commands for the entire program. The keymap presets include Blender, which is the native keymap, Blender 27X, which is the keymap for a past version of Blender, version 2.79, before major changes to the software occurred. Many preferred this key setup to the current one, so it's included here as an option. And industry compatible is a keymap that conforms keys to the commands you will find in software like Maya or Cinema 4D, though I find this to be a bit more confusing than it's worth. We're going to add some slight modifications to the native Blender keymap. I want to make some changes in how we navigate in 3D space, as well as toggle the different gizmos for position, rotation, and scale so they are identical to that of Maya and Cinema 4D. In my many years of experience working with these different softwares and switching between them, you start to learn the unique hotkeys for each without issue. However, when moving around in 3D space, it hurts your brain to continually have to remind yourself which hotkey you need to orbit around and manipulate objects. I've found it's best to just have this be consistent across the board, and not even have to think about it. Plus, you will be more acclimated to Maya or Cinema 4D if you ever need to use one as your primary software. Outside of navigation and object transformation, I want you to learn Blender's current keymap, so it's easier for you to follow along with any training materials you may pursue outside of the Animation Society. It's hard to unlearn things like keystrokes. Modifying hotkeys. So first, to change hotkeys for navigating within the viewport, we're going to scroll down to the 3D View dropdown in the keymap menu. Under 3D View Global, we will be changing 3 values. Let's scroll down to the second Rotate view within this list. I'm going to click the currently assigned hotkey to the right, then hold Option or Alt plus left mouse click to assign my new hotkey. Just below this is our Pan view. We'll assign a new hotkey here by holding Option or Alt plus middle mouse click. And lastly, for our first Zoom view within this list, we'll hold Option or Alt plus right mouse click. Note any of these values can be reverted to their default at any time by selecting the arrow key to the right of each item. Let's now hop over to the 3D viewport to make sure our hotkeys are correctly assigned. Option or Alt left mouse click to rotate or orbit view, Option or Alt middle mouse click to pan view, and Option or Alt right mouse click to zoom view. So those are all looking correct. Next, we need to disable Blender's default rotate functionality. We can do this by going back to the keymap settings under Object Mode Global, and unchecking Rotate. Back in the viewport, we can modify a button by right-clicking and selecting Change Shortcut. The shortcuts we want to assign are for the Move, Rotate, and Scale tools in the side toolbar. First, we're going to assign the W hotkey to the Move tool. Then assign the E hotkey to the Rotate tool. And then assign the R hotkey to the Scale tool. Now if I hit any of these hotkeys, I can toggle between these 3 different tools. Note we can remove an assigned hotkey by right-clicking and selecting Remove Shortcut. So with these settings adjusted, you now have the ability to jump between different software in the future and instantly be able to navigate the viewport and transform objects. This is useful as you may end up getting employed somewhere that uses a different software than Blender, and this will lower the learning curve a bit when picking up that new software. Now, I have demonstrated how to make these keymap adjustments manually, so you know exactly what was changed and how to make modifications yourself in the future. However, to save you time, I've included a preset keymap file with all of these settings already applied in the project files below this lesson. Simply import this file in the keymap preferences to apply them to your software. Peripherals. So if you haven't noticed, I don't use a mouse, and haven't for over a decade. I use a Wacom tablet and stylus because I can move more quickly around the screen. The posture helps to avoid carpal tunnel syndrome, and it's much easier to write or sketch than with a traditional mouse. Despite how strange it may feel to use a Wacom pen, I highly encourage you to acquire one, for the reasons I just mentioned. However, if you use a standard mouse, that's okay too. Now my pen is set up in a similar fashion to your mouse, with the exception that in order to left-click, I press down on my pen, whereas you click a button. Everything else is essentially the same, so you should be able to follow along without a problem. If you have a Wacom pen, all you need to do is go to the Wacom app you installed when you first plugged in your tablet, and go to Pen Settings. On the side of the pen, set the button closest to the eraser to right-click. Set the button closest to the pen tip to middle-click. If your pen still isn't doing what you need it to, you may have to set it specifically for Blender. Just make sure you have the Blender icon selected under Application. To test to see if your mouse or pen is working properly, back in Blender, within the main viewport, hold Option or Alt and left-click drag to orbit around the cube. Then hold Option or Alt and middle mouse drag to pan around. And lastly, hold Option or Alt and right-click drag to zoom in and out. If all of these commands are doing what they're supposed to do, you're good to go. If you're still having issues, follow these steps again, making sure you've imported the TOS keymap and have your mouse or Wacom pen configured correctly, and you're hitting the right keys and clicks. Interface. Now Blender includes this cube for new projects in order for you to gain your bearings when in the 3D viewport. As you'll soon discover, it is easy to lose your orientation when moving through 3D space, especially if there are no 3D objects to keep you grounded. But we'll explore viewport navigation a little more in the next lesson. For now, I want to give you a tour of the interface, including the panels, menus, and submenus. Up top, we have the main menu, containing master commands like Save, Close, and Preferences. Below that is the View menu and Header menu, which contains specific settings unique for the largest panel, the 3D viewport. This panel is essentially what the camera sees, allowing you to manipulate what is and is out of frame for your final render. To the left is the toolbar, which houses the tools used to manipulate objects, like position, rotation, and scale. On the bottom, we have the timeline, where keyframes are set during the animation process. Below that is the info bar, which lets you know which keys or clicks are currently active, as well as other helpful information. To the right is the Properties panel, which contains all the under-the-hood information in your scene. Above it, the Outliner, which is a stacked list of all the objects within your scene. And lastly, we have a pop-up or pie menu, which there are many depending on what hotkey you use or what tool you currently have activated. Now let's look into each section in greater detail. Main menu. Just like any program, the main menu houses global commands. The Blender menu will tell you about software version and system status. Under File, you can open or save a Blender project, link to another Blender file, append, which you can import specific Blender assets, import or export. Note files save in .blend format, or you can export as a .fbx or .obj file. Under Edit, we can undo, rename, or access the preferences. Under Render, we can output an image, video, or audio. Under Window, we can open a new window or panel, go full screen, toggle workspaces, or take screenshots. And lastly, under Help, you can access the manual, tutorials, or Blender support. To the far right, you have your scene options. While you may have a .blend Blender file open right now, you can have multiple scenes that exist within that Blender file. Here you can create a brand new scene and rename it. You can create a new scene with just the scene and render settings copied over. You can create a linked copy where any objects you modify in one scene are modified in the linked scene. Or you can create an exact full copy of the scene you currently have open. You can access your different scenes using the drop-down to the left, or delete them using the X icon to the right. You also have the option to create view layers that you can use to selectively view or render certain objects in your scenes. To demonstrate how this works, let me go ahead and create a new view layer. Then in the outliner, I'm going to hide my cube by pressing the eye icon. Now if I switch to my other view layer, you can see that the cube becomes visible again because this view layer has different settings for what is and is not visible. You can also copy the settings over to a new blank layer, or start with a completely blank view layer. 3D Viewport. Next, let's talk about the biggest panel, the 3D Viewport. The 3D Viewport shows you a three-dimensional home screen. If you've seen The Matrix, this is the void where any sort of object can be brought in and any sort of world constructed. This is where your eyeballs will spend the majority of their time looking, with all of the artist's tools surrounding it. If this is your first time working in 3D, it can feel a bit strange working with X, Y, and Z dimensions all at once. But you get used to it, and there are ways for you to adjust how you are looking at your 3D scene that makes it easier to manage. Like most graphics software, the entire UI is made up of a series of panels, which are highly customizable. Each of these panels can be scaled to your liking by left-click dragging on an edge. The type of information that is being displayed on a particular panel can be changed by selecting the Editor Type icon. Here we have a list of a lot of different panel types. In the beginning, you'll most likely interact with the 3D Viewport, Video Sequencer, Dope Sheet, Timeline, Graph Editor, as well as the Outliner. Now you can add new panels by right-clicking on an edge, selecting from the area options, and choosing where to create the split. Press Escape to cancel. To get rid of it, select Join in the direction you want to collapse in on. You can also maximize or reset a panel by hitting Ctrl plus Spacebar, or going to View, Area, Maximum Area. To enable a quad view, which is a standard setup for programs like Maya or Cinema 4D, press Ctrl plus Alt Option plus Q. Or go to View, Area, Toggle Quad View. While I am used to this layout coming from other software, I find I don't need to rely on it quite so much in Blender for reasons I will explain in another lesson. But essentially, this multi-view helps you see not only objects from a camera's perspective, but the side, top, bottom, front, or back of an object simultaneously to better help you visualize an object's appearance or movement. While customizing your own interface can be useful, Blender has made some nifty preset layouts that you will find up top. Holding Ctrl plus page up or down will cycle through these presets as well. Which of these you use all depends on your process, but conveniently these are split up by each major phase of the production pipeline. Toolbar. Next, let's talk about the toolbar. To the left, you will see a row of tools that vary depending on the object interaction mode that you are in. If you don't see it, you can click the arrow to the far left edge of the UI, or drag to resize the toolbar. If it's in the way, use the hotkey T to show and hide the toolbar. Right now, we are in object mode, so the tools available to us are the Select tool, which has a marquee in the form of a box, circle, or lasso. The 3D cursor, which is the origin point for new objects. It's used for snapping objects to it. Also used as a pivot point for position, scale, or rotation of an object. Then we have the move, rotate, and scale gizmos. The transform gizmo is a collection of all three. Below this is the annotate tool, which is used for drawing or taking notes right within the viewport. The measure tool is used to measure any distance within 3D space. And the add shape tool allows for the quick creation of different types of 3D shapes. Now alternatively, you can use Shift plus Spacebar to pull up a quick menu for these toolbar items. When in other object interaction modes, this toolbar will update to a different set of tools. But we'll look at some of these later on in an upcoming lesson. Another important toolbar appears on the right of the 3D viewport, which can be revealed or hidden using the N hotkey. For any object we have selected, we can type in an X, Y, or Z value for the location, a degree amount for rotation, and a multiplier amount for the scale. For some objects, we can even manually enter in specific dimensions. And any of these values can be locked at any time to limit the transformations of an object. In addition to these parameters, which fall under the Item tab, this panel houses a lot of other information. Under the Tool tab, we can access specific settings pertaining to the tool you have selected on the left. And under the View tab, we have options for what you see in the 3D viewport, including the camera settings. Header menu. Below the main menu is the header menu, which contains a multitude of different controls which vary depending on the tool that is selected. The left side of the header menu allows you to change the 3D viewport's editor type, as well as your object interaction mode. But you can also, under the View tab, execute view-related commands. Under the Select menu, use advanced object selection methods. Under the Add menu, add all sorts of different objects from Blender's library. Note, within this software, preset mesh objects are known as primitives. And lastly, under the Object tab, you have access to advanced modeling and object relationship tools. Moving to the middle section, you can modify transform orientations, which we will discuss later on. Pivot points, the center location to which an object moves, rotates, or scales around. Snapping, as well as proportional object editing mode, which is used to move objects in some sort of uniform pattern. The right section houses a lot of display-related modes and tools. The first dropdown allows you to show or hide certain objects that you do or don't want to see. We can also toggle visibility of certain gizmos. Next, we have the Overlays dropdown, where we can make the major changes to what we see in our workspace. X-ray mode will allow us to see through all objects within our 3D viewport. Then we have our different viewport shading modes, which consist of wireframe, solid, material preview, and rendered. Lastly, options will limit what type of properties can be changed on certain objects. Timeline. At the bottom of the UI is the timeline, which displays a linear time bar at a specific frame rate. At the top left of the timeline, we have a few different submenus. In the playback options, we can control things like playback performance, and if we want our animation to sync up with any audio that we've imported as well. We can choose if we want to play the entire timeline or just a section of it. As well where we actually see the playback, which we can enable or disable for certain windows. Our View submenu is all about what we are actually seeing within the timeline, such as our start and end frame range, as well as timecodes. And our Marker submenu allows us to manage all of the markers that we place within our timeline. These are used for organizational purposes. For example, if you wanted to mark an area of importance within your sequence. You can also change the label of each of these markers. At the top center, we can find the Auto Keying button, which automatically saves data like location, rotation, and scaling values that we applied to objects in our scene, and places them within a keyframe on our timeline. This is convenient because by default, keyframes must be placed manually for every object that you animate. There's also a submenu for auto keying options. Moving to the right, we have our playback controls. In the center, we have our play and stop, which you can enable by pressing spacebar. Just behind that, we have rewind, to play back our animation in reverse. On either side of play and rewind, we have the jump ahead or jump back to next keyframe, which we can also do using the left or right arrow hotkeys. And lastly, on the far ends, we have our jump to beginning or jump to endpoint, which will simply take us to the beginning or end of our time range. Now on the far right are some advanced playback controls for your timeline. The first box will show what current frame that you are on. You can click in this box and manually type in a frame you want to jump to. The start and end boxes allow you to enter in what you want your overall frame range to be. This will not only be the frame range for your playback, but the frame range that will actually render by default. When I first open up a new scene to start a new project, one of the first things I do is set my frame range. So if working at 24 frames per second, and I know that my animation will be around 10 seconds, 24 times 10, I can set my end value to 240. That last little stopwatch icon is called Use Preview Range, which allows you to set a custom start and stop time just for the playback. This is useful if you're only working on a small portion of your animation, and want your playback to simply just loop within a small section of the overall frame range. Now to adjust the timeline, you can scroll left or right using the scroll bar at the bottom. Or you can middle mouse drag to pan left or right through the timeline. You can adjust the scale, zoom, or number of frames displayed by moving the handles on either end of the scroll bar. Alternatively, you can hold Ctrl or Command plus middle mouse drag to do the same thing. Or rotate the wheel on your mouse. Pop-up Pie menu. In addition to all the toolbars you can see, there are some that only appear when using certain hotkeys. For example, right-clicking in the 3D viewport opens the Object menu for more quick object modification options. There are also pie menus. So let's say I move my cursor to somewhere that isn't the exact center of my 3D world, but I want to put it back to where it originally was. In order to get this cursor back to its origin, which is 0 for X, 0 for Y, and 0 for Z, then I can pull up a pie menu using Shift-S and selecting Cursor to World Origin, or pressing the 1 key, which is this command's number designation, and we can see that the cursor has snapped back to the world origin point.
Shift+C also does this.
Note, to get out of a pie menu once enabled, you can simply right-click anywhere in the 3D viewport. There are many different hotkeys for pie menus, so it can be tough remembering all of them. However, there are also many different ways to enable the same command. You will find what is most comfortable for you through repetition. If you need to pull up the Help menu or do a quick Google search for a hotkey you can't remember, just know that I still do the same all the time, and I've been using this software for quite a while. For your reference, here are the hotkeys for all of the main pie menus. Hit Ctrl-Tab for the Mode Select menu. Hit comma for the Transform Orientation menu. Period for the Pivot Point menu. Ctrl-Shift-Tab for the Snapping menu. Shift-S for the Snap menu. Shift-O for the Proportional Editing menu. And Z for the Shading menu. Outliner. The Outliner panel, located to the top right, shows you all of the objects within your scene. It sorts these objects into organized groups, or boxes, called collections. By default, objects are sorted alphabetically, however that can be disabled if desired. You can create, delete, or duplicate collections as you see fit, however you find it easiest to stay organized. Collections can be expanded or collapsed by clicking the arrows alongside them. As you start to work on more and more complex scenes, staying organized is key to working efficiently, especially if you need to hand off your work to another artist. Currently, we are viewing the scene under the View Layer mode, but you can change the Display mode to view this information in different ways. You can use the search bar to hunt down items. Filter out different types of objects seen in the outliner. This is also where you can uncheck Sort Alphabetically if you want to move things around on your own. And you can hide objects from view in the 3D viewport by clicking the eye icon to the right, or within the final rendered image by clicking the camera icon. Now to the right of any object, you will see a tag that indicates what type of object it is. You can also use this to correlate to a tab in the Properties panel if you're unsure where to go to modify that object. Properties panel. So for the rest of this lesson, we're going to go over the Properties panel, as it is the most complex and contains by far the greatest number of individual controls and data points than any other part of this program. The Properties panel appears as a vertical stack that changes depending on the tool, mode, or selected object you are currently using. I will go over some of the tools not shown here in the upcoming lessons, but for now, let's go over the most common ones. At the top, the Active Tool and Workspace settings updates depending on the type of tool you're using. Note the options available to us when I have the Move tool selected. If I select the Add Cube tool, you can see everything in the Active Tool tab has updated to the options available for that tool. These are settings I can modify before creating my object within the 3D viewport. The next set of property tabs are specific to the scene you currently have open. The first tab in this set is the Render Properties. Here you can change the render engine, as well as all the attributes that are supported by that engine below, such as sampling or depth of field. We will go into detail on all these settings during the lesson on rendering, but essentially these are all the settings that affect quality and how your final render looks. The next tab with the printer icon is the Output tab. This is hugely important because this is where you not only set the resolution of your scene when it is rendered, which can affect just how much of your scene's camera can see on all sides, but this is where you set just how long you want your scene to be and what frame rate it plays at. This is also where you go to choose a file path where all your rendered images or videos will go. This is often one of the first tabs I open up when working on a project, because changing these settings at any point after you've already started on an animation can be catastrophic, so establish these settings early and you'll avoid any issues. I briefly mentioned view layers earlier, but this next tab provides more finite controls for your view layers. More specifically, the view layer you have currently selected. Yes, you can render only certain objects, but you can also break up your scene into separate passes that you can later use to composite together in, say, After Effects. Passes are commonly used in the rendering process because it allows the compositor more control when adjusting things like light, shadow, or blurring the background behind a character. If you were to render out all of these passes together and flatten them into a single image straight out of Blender, there's not much you could do from a compositing standpoint to make things look more interesting later on in post-production. The Scene Properties tab houses other odds and ends that are important elements of your scene, such as our default world view camera, what unit of measurement we want to use, and even physics settings such as how much gravity is being applied during our simulations. Now the world properties control things like the background color of your scene, and allows you to add effects like fog or mist. This is useful if you want to create a solid white or green screen background for your entire scene.
Just note, if you're going to set a world color, make sure you toggle Rendered in Viewport Shading.
The Collection Properties tab stands alone and provides more controls over the objects within a selected collection in the outliner. We have the option of making a collection selectable, so you can control what you can or can't select within it. Useful if you know that these objects aren't going anywhere and don't want to accidentally transform them when working in the viewport. Below this is Disable in Renders, and you can see by checking this on, the camera icon for all objects within this collection have been toggled off. Our other options are Holdout, which create a mask of that layer, and Indirect Only, which only allows objects to interact with one another through shadow, reflection, etc. These are advanced tools that I don't see you using anytime soon. The next set of tabs correlate specifically to the object or objects you have selected. The Object Properties is a frequently used tab, as it gives you the pinpoint precision over the position, rotation, and scale of your objects, instead of just moving them around freely. Here, you can also create relations by parenting one object to another. You can add that object to a specific collection. You can create motion paths to better visualize the movements of your objects. Or you can modify that object's visibility in renders, as well as how it appears in the viewport. The Modifier tab is another commonly used area where tons of different modifiers can be applied from Blender's library. These modifiers can be stacked, reordered, and manipulated to get the exact result you're looking for. There are a ton of these, so the best thing to do is to go crazy and start experimenting with some of the different modifiers available to you in this section. To quickly demonstrate this, I'm going to add an array to my cube. This will create multiple copies extending out into 3D space. Then I'll add a subdivision surface, which will multiply the mesh density of my cube. Then let's do a quick reorder of these modifiers to show you how that makes a difference in the order of operations. You'll get the chance to use some of these different modifiers in upcoming lessons. Now the Particles tab allows you to create particle emitters that either stand alone or are emitted from an object. This can be used to create anything you can imagine, such as rain, snow, foam, bugs, bullets, clouds, etc. The Physics tab presents you with a variety of different forces and dynamic tools that can be used in all sorts of different situations that require real-life simulation. These I would consider an advanced skill set, so we will discuss these at the tail end of this module. Continuing down the line, the Object Constraints tab is used to create unique relationships between two objects to aid in the animation process. Let me give you a little bit of a demonstration. By creating a Track 2 constraint on my original cube, and setting a second cube as its target, my original cube will now always look at my second cube because I've created this unique relationship. This is just one of the many different types of relationships you can create between objects. As you can imagine, there are a ton of different ways you can utilize these capabilities, and we will explore them all, as you guessed it, in an upcoming lesson. Moving on, the Object Data tab provides controls to manipulate an object's mesh data. Mesh data is like an object's DNA. It governs both its shape and form. There's a lot you can do with this tab, such as assign vertices to specific groups, create blend shapes, which are modifications of a shape that it can morph into, as well as all sorts of options pertaining to its texturing and UV maps. You can even transform one object into another object in your scene. Let me quickly demonstrate how I can morph my cube into a UV sphere. Now we will go into more detail on the Material tab shortly, but in essence, it gives us control over how the material appears that is assigned to a particular object. We can change a material's color, assign a texture from an external image file, make it more shiny or reflective, and change its transparency or translucence. The final tab is the Texture properties. It stands alone because it is not object-specific. Each texture you create is unique and can be applied to objects, to the world, or as a texture within a texture. Textures can be generated procedurally, meaning they are computer-generated, like a random cloud or noise pattern, or created from an imported image. You can even bring in a video file to use as a texture. Now, as I mentioned, there are other tabs that will appear based on the type of object you have selected. For instance, when selecting a light, the Light tab will appear, with all the properties pertaining to things like its strength, color, and shadowing. Tooltip. Before we wrap up this lesson, I want to note that if any of these tools are confusing, or you forget what they do or how to use them, you can always hover your cursor over any tool to cue a tooltip that should provide some useful context. Additionally, if you notice a tool is not located where it is shown during any of these lessons, chances are it was modified or relocated in future releases of Blender that came after this lesson was created. While there are frequent updates to course content, some items may go unnoticed, so please reach out to help@theanimationsociety.com so we can make the necessary updates. Now, are there a bunch of other submenus and tools that we didn't go over in this lesson? Definitely. However, upcoming lessons will go into much more detail on many of these, so you'll get the opportunity to commit many of them to memory. I know full well that this was a lot to process. It sure was for me the first time I opened 3D software. So take a break, give yourself a chance to absorb some of this information, and when you feel you are ready, move on to the next lesson. Quick note, as a reminder, make sure you have imported your new keymap by accessing the project files below.